Hi, welcome to Trans Theory, a podcast about the philosophy and science of gender. My name's Yarrow, and my pronouns are she, her.
My name's Ash, and my pronouns are they and them.
And today we're talking about epistemic injustices.
What does that mean?
Well, epistemic or epistemological has to do with knowledge. So I'm guessing that this is injustices that have to do with knowledge. And since this is trans theory, I'm guessing it's knowledge about trans people.
Oh, yeah, exactly. More specifically, epistemic or epistemological means it's related to the production of knowledge, mostly. The production and like how this is a whole process. Basically, it's more of a process because we could just say knowledge otherwise.
So can you give an example of an epistemic injustice?
So an epistemic injustice, well, the first one I would like to talk about is how voices of trans, non-binary, and gender diverse people are silenced in our society, have been silenced, and actually slowly and in the last decade have resurfaced a lot more, and we take much more space. But this silencing, and especially usually it happens alongside the appropriation of our own narrative. Well, how all of this in itself is an injustice because it silences us, it marginalizes us, it affects our health. And all of this is really about the fact that we really, the cis people didn't want us to make knowledge about ourselves, blocked us from even trying to be in groups, by arresting us because we didn't have we had more than 3 objects on our, we were wearing 3 objects or more on our bodies that were not supposedly the right gender, or just putting us in jails for that. All of this is sort of in the process of an epistemic injustice in a way.
When you talk about the appropriation of our narrative as trans people, the appropriation by cis people, that would include things like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual Diagnosis of Gender Identity Disorder and the psychiatrization of being trans as a mental disorder or a mental illness, right?
Exactly. So in the DSM-4, we used to have the gender identity disorder, which is no longer here in the DSM-5. In the DSM-5, however, we do have a diagnosis for gender dysphoria, which actually was not in the DSM or even thought to be in the DSM before the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, the WPATH, in its standards of care. So WPATH is kind of like the organization that makes the international standards of care for trans people to access surgeries, so to access hormones or any other types of transition care. So yeah, it is highly related to that. So one of the good examples that we have of appropriation of our narrative is how for decades and even up until recently, the whole WPATH, the council or the board of WPATH used to be only constitute of cisgender people. And so this used to be cisgender people.
That kind of contradicts the name, doesn't it?
Yeah, kind of. So it used to be just cisgender people who were literally saying what trans people deserve and what they don't. And these have high values for governments. The governments really look at the WPATH standards that they create. They're actually going to release a version 8 pretty in the next months, but the past version 7 is the current standards, and it was produced in 2011 2012, so it's a decade old. And governments look at this and they're like, okay, we're going to make our policies on what you think should deserve coverage. And so this has a huge impact. When cis people say on these documents that we shouldn't, like, for example, like, hair transplantation or like facial, like feminization surgery shouldn't be accessible because it's cosmetic. Well, this has a huge impact on the lives of trans people, right?
So do you know what's new in the new version of the WPATH recommendations?
Do you mean in the 7th or the
8th, the one that's coming up?
So the 8th hasn't come up yet. And I cannot really talk much about it. I'm very sorry. I cannot really talk much about it because I haven't had the chance to read any sort of document about the preliminary versions. But one of the things that I know, I will not talk specifically, but one of the things that I know generally is that there will be new hormone regimens for like non-binary people, for example, which didn't exist in this past, the current version. So we only have hormone regimens for quote unquote masculinization, testosterone based hormone replacement therapy, and estradiol and spironolactone and other like progesterone based hormone replacement therapy. So this is kind of like new. This is one of the major things that are going to be implemented. But that's great because more and more trans people have been involved in the process, but it's really far from expected to be perfect because, again, we're probably going to talk about this a little bit later, but there are people who are gatekeepers in there and even people who promote very outdated views of what trans care should be.
Are there any trans people on the board now?
I do not want to talk through my hat, but I do believe so.
Okay. So when is the new WPATH recommendations? When are they coming out?
So it was supposed to come out in the first quarter, the first quarter of the year.
Wow, they're very late.
I guess, yeah. They're there's been a lot of drama too.
Really?
Yeah, because, let's spill the tea. For example, in the adolescent chapter, there was one person who actually did a lot of self-referencing, which was funny, who's a researcher from Netherlands. And if you know about trans health a lot, the Netherlands have their own, so they actually developed the gatekeeping approach. So the gatekeeping approach is also called the Amsterdam approach.
And the Amsterdam model, I've heard that before.
Yeah, exactly. So the Amsterdam model of trans care is one that really wants to assess trans people. Like they really want to see is there what they call basically readiness assessments. So it's usually a lot of cisgender assumptions on what does it mean to be ready as a trans person to access healthcare. And it really is mind-blowing how there's absolutely no critical reflection involved in the process of what we call readiness assessments, because it's really about cisgender assumptions and really not something that trans people created for themselves, as you would think, right?
Can you think of a specific example of that?
So for children, a readiness assessment would be one of the questions would be something like, is the gender of the person stable? Has it been stable for long? Does it seem to be something that's not just a phase? And even in the past approaches, we used to actually try to deter the child from actually accessing their identity, exploring it. So is it just a phase? And it's very as you can see, it's very cis normative. It's very cis centered. So it's think about it for a second. Are our identities even static? ever. Like, we always change in a way. Like, someone can like realize they're trans like after 35 years. Someone can like, we are always changing. So what does that mean to have like a stable gender identity? What does that mean? Is it molded? Is it shaped by like the parents? Because like a lot of the times, like the parents are going to be like, and this is something I've heard in research a lot. If you compare the narrative of the child and the narrative of the parent, a lot of the times the narrative of the parent is going to be much more binary than the narrative of the child. It's so this is like one of the questions, as you asked, that would be in the readiness assessment. So as that person, for example, accessing surgery, has that person taken like estradiol for a year, estrogen for a year? Has that person still like not withheld, but like still like identifies as like a woman, as a non-binary person, like after even going through that year? So they're going to make you wait that whole year sometimes to even access like in the past, like it could be like even like waiting to access hormones, which is pretty much what happens here, even though we have like more of a trans affirmative model, but the system is kind of like really not making it easy to access anyways. So sometimes like right now where we are located in Montreal, a clinic has a 2.5 years wait list right now, which is like, who waits that long? Like, can you believe like how dangerous this can be?
Yeah.
In terms of suicide, in terms of psychological distress. Like, yeah.
Yeah, 2.5 years is an eternity.
They even stopped taking patients on their wait list because they were like, we don't have, and this is all the problem of making this like a specialty care. This is all the problem of that. And yeah. We could go on that. I could go on that for a very long time. But so appropriation of narrative like causes a lot of like trickle down.
So it starts with basically the board of directors of WPATH, and then that their recommendations
go through
governments, and those governments basically set the standard of care for how individual doctors are going to treat trans patients.
Yeah, and even like doctors here, and so in Quebec,
and what gets covered by insurance, whether it's public or private.
And even like sometimes it depends on I think it would even start more from like even higher than WPATH. I think it would start at more of a even like at a macro systemic level of like, what is the current ongoing narrative of like how should we treat trans people collectively, and then it goes down into these institutions who are the kind of reflecting. So if I want to like use my kind of like a social work frameworks here, so it's kind of like trickling down that way. And even governments like do not respect necessarily at 100% what is written, and usually takes years before they're adopted. So even though the standards of care at number 8 are gonna like pop out eventually, it's still maybe gonna take like a few years before governments like are gonna adopt them and implement them. And yeah, so it's very hard to access. One of the interesting examples of the differences. So here we use we have kind of a specialty care framework. I'm not saying it's so I'm going to talk about Ontario, which Ontario declared that it's not, and that every like nurse, like every clinician nurse, every like doctor is apt to do this. And then if there's like a very complicated, like complex chronic issue, then we should definitely use the help of an endocrinologist in the equation.
Prescribing hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah, exactly. But all of them in Ontario, like the government declared that in its policy that because the wait lists of the specialty care places were too long, that everyone who's deemed to be apt to do that should do it. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect. There's probably people still being refused. But it should be like at least a first step. And this is, again, like appropriation of narrative. Like one good example in Quebec is when the government, so there was a judgment by Judge Moore here in Quebec saying that we trans people, non-binary people, like should be able to change like our gender to X, and like one of that was also that non-binary like people, like children from I don't recall exactly if it's 14 to 17 or 14 and under. I think it was 14 and under, saying that children under 14 should be able to change their gender marker without having a psychological assessment. And the government said, "Whoop, we're gonna challenge that in justice,
In court?
Yeah. So again, this is like what cis people think we should have access to. I mean, like changing a gender marker for a child won't like impact. I mean, it's changeable. You can revert back if it's not, but that would mean the world to a child, and that could change the way they are called by like professionals and stuff like that. It could really make like
it's extremely gatekeepy to require psychological evaluation just to change an M to an F or an F to an X or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So these are also part of the appropriation of our narrative, and what should we have access to and what should we not have access to. And also, in that line, one of the other things that appropriation of narrative does is, and what kind of like a vestige of that is how we are not believing, especially a lot of professionals are not believing the diversity of narratives because, for example, academia and academic papers and scientists really like enforce the idea of the gender binary into this production of knowledge, this cisgender epistemology, should we say, like this creation of knowledge, this process of creation of knowledge that's very centered on cisgender people's thoughts. Well, that makes trans people in clinical settings or in doctors' offices, it just makes them sometimes unable to access care unless they conform their narrative to what is typically like the trans narrative. Like, oh, like I knew I was like a trans person ever since I was like 4 and then, or like 8, and then like I repressed it, and then like and I knew I was a trans girl ever since, and it's usually very binary and stuff like. So for example, this is the kind of example, and if you don't say such things, like that was my experience too, well, you're just gonna get kind of denied. And this is an epistemic injustice. It's an injustice of access to your rights of care. Like trans care is rights. It's human rights, right? It's really like, it's defining you. Like you have the right to define yourself, who you are. Just like you have the right to say like, I don't want a child, and be like, go. And even people, like there's a lot of parallels we can make between abortion and access to HRT. Like how a lot of people who wants abortions are going to have like assessments before. And we're going to try to convince them that, oh, like you can keep, you know, like what it would be like if you kept your child and whatever. And we are trying to convince them that they don't want this. And we kind of do like a lot of the same things, the same tactics to trans people, because women can't decide for themselves, right? This is also an epistemic injustice. Women and pregnant people, yeah.
They're both issues of bodily autonomy as well. Like, cis people are very, very concerned with what trans people do with their bodies. Overly concerned.
Yeah, especially when we know that if we take surgery, for example, a lot of people, cis people who go through surgeries will have a really much higher like regret rate than like trans people, like even accessing like life-saving gender affirming surgeries.
Right.
Like people could just regret like huge, I mean, they could technically have huge like psychological distress from having like a surgery that in fact they did not want. And in trans people it really is like a very, very, very low percentage, and it's not very significant at all.
So what you're saying is like for just all surgeries in general, there's a rate of regret in terms of what percentage of the time do people say, oh, I regret having that surgery, I wish I hadn't had it. And this is for all people, trans and cis. It's just the overall average for all types of surgeries. And that average is higher than the specific rate of regret for gender affirming surgeries for trans people. Trans people regret having gender affirming surgeries at a much lower rate than
very much lower, if not around like minus 1%. And I've heard, I don't want to like talk through my hat again, but some of like the surgeries like go way over like 1-2%, 3% like of regret rate. I don't want to like have an exact percentage because I don't have the exact number right in front of me, but I do remember it's much higher than that for some surgeries, and yet we do not gatekeep these surgeries. We're like, oh, you want a breast augmentation? Oh, you want to like, you want to have like your nose job? Fine, go for it, and you're gonna pay what you have to pay, and then there you go, you have it. Whereas like trying to get surgery as a trans person is almost like a marriage contract, like super complicated, a lot of paperwork, a lot of waiting to do, readiness assessments.
Interestingly, I've heard that there's some gatekeeping around breast reduction for cis women, which is kind of, I feel like it comes from the same mindset of like not respecting people's bodily autonomy and applying your beauty standards and your gender standards to other people.
I've definitely heard that there is a lot for hysterectomies.
Right, yeah, for sure. Reproductive care, yeah.
Exactly. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. The people who are like super against like people aborting their babies, whatever, like they're not even babies. I can't call them
fetuses.
Babies. The fetuses, yeah. Like they will still like make it very hard to access to contraception or permanent forms of contraception, such as like and weirdly for people who have like testes and like want to get like a ligature of
like a
vasectomy, yeah, then it's going to be super the surgery is also much easier. Also, it does less like it's reversible, and it's like go for it. Whereas like if someone who has like a uterus wants to have a hysterectomy, well, it's very hard to access to. So there's like common issues there about bodily autonomy that really is a huge epistemic injustice, and usually is a lot of cisgender men who really like in gynecology, a lot of the knowledge that was created by men and white men, right? White cisgender men. And so it's hard to have decent care in that way.
So on the topic of epistemic injustices, one point that you brought up for us to discuss is how when like a TV station or a newspaper wants to bring on a quote unquote credible expert about trans people, they usually choose cisgender experts.
Quote unquote experts, right?
Right. Their credentials might not always be superb. And I guess the thinking there is like you're like neutral, detached, you're impartial, you don't have a dog in the fight. Like if you're or a trans person, then you must be like biased. Like they basically want like they want like a quote unquote normal person to tell us like, hey, are these people crazy who these men who think they're women, these women who think they're men, these people who say they're not women or men, like they, tell us whether they're crazy or not, normal doctor.
What are these transistors? Kind of thing, yeah. So yeah, there's this huge problem that goes back to one of like the very like the kind of like house like modern, like quote unquote modern science began, which is like, oh, you should be like out of this, like we don't have emotions, like you should be very rational, like because men are rational, right? And like kind of like this positivism, like, oh, like science should be like an exterior, like you should be from outside of the group, you should be like just an observant. And if you are inside the group, and it used to be also like a lot related to women, because women were crazy, right? Their hormones were making them crazy, like, so how could we know they possibly told the truth? Well, we had to be like observing from the exterior and actually making the narrative ourselves, because they can't even decide for themselves, these crazy bitches. Like this is really how like a science was acting around like cisgender women for a long time, and so and still acting like this. But the problem is that this narrative of like this independency, this like you should be from outside, is still like a vestige of this thought that you can't produce knowledge and coherent like expertise if you are a person from within. You have to be outside of it.
I think the origin of this attitude in the human sciences, the social sciences, comes from trying to emulate the natural sciences. So physics, chemistry, and like the biology of like plants and non-human animals, or like cell biology, genetics. Like those are all examples where the model is to like run an experiment and observe it from the outside and have as little interference as possible by a person. But when you're studying people, like trying to apply that model doesn't necessarily work the same way.
Are you sure? Like trans people aren't plants? Like
well, I think like, so we talked about like the one mindset, one way you can approach it is the detachedness, like to say that people within a certain group are too biased to be able to study that group. Another way to approach the social sciences, the science of human beings, is to look at informally accumulated cultural knowledge as a legitimate and important source of knowledge about people. So, for example, like the knowledge of trans people accrued through lived experience as being an important source of knowledge, and treating that as a form of expertise and as a form of scientific evidence or scientific authority. That's like a totally different mindset, and like that's the one that we advocate when we say when we advocate for having trans people speak about trans issues on TV and in newspapers and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think what you're bringing is what we call in philosophy, it was brought up first by what we call feminist epistemologies. It's like we can make our own, the meaning making can happen from within. Like, we're not crazy. Like emotions are also a part of this reality. We don't have to deny them. And it's also like Black and Afrocentric epistemologies who also can also tell us a lot about that. One of like the aspects of that I learned was that in the process of Black and Afrocentric epistemologies, one of the framework they will use is that intonations and like how someone will speak truly from like with a lot of great emotions when they talk really like attributes a lot of meaning to what they say, and they're gonna take like the person's really going to attribute like a huge importance to that too. And that's how like people make meaning together. Like they create this this knowledge together, this process of knowledge. Emotions have to do have to play to in the equation of making knowledge, like the emotions and the intensity of what you're going through. It's very important in Black epistemologies. One of the most interesting, honestly, courses I've had about these in feminist philosophy when I was in my social work bachelor. So the feminist epistemologies are kind of like trying to push away this kind of like, oh, I'm independent. This is like, we're actually proud in saying like, we are a part of it. And that doesn't mean what we say and do and create in knowledge is wrong. And on the other side, we actually think that getting the experience of people from within, like what they actually live and how they make meaning about their lives is much more right and much more like ethical than trying to impose your knowledge from an outside perspective where you don't actually live anything the person is experiencing on a daily basis. Like, believe people. Like, it's really about truly like making meaning. You don't take that from one person. Like you have like 14, 15, 20 people in a qualitative study, and usually there are things that are going to come together, and there are like categories that you're going to make that, oh, that looks similar to what the other person said too. So, and with the accumulation, like you were saying, of narratives, of what we call like also like a lot of that is from grounded theory or thematic analysis, like usually things that are going to come up again and again and again, so we're like, oh, that actually makes sense for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So maybe
these are qualitative research methodologies in social work. Grounded theory and
sociology, in a lot of like social sciences and humanities. Yeah.
Would that be one in anthropology as well?
Yes, it's one that's very prominent. And there's also like in anthropology you also have the ethnographic methodologies, which are a little bit. I mean, it's very much like documenting, but there's like different ways of doing that, and some of them are very like colonialistic. There's problems within anthropology, but I think more and more are like going towards we believe the people and what they say and the meaning they make about their lives. Yeah. So to carry on that idea, when you said that sometimes in TV shows, like they invite supposedly, like allegedly, like these experts, like these alleged experts, there are cisgender people. Like a lot of the times, there are gonna be a pool of trans people who are academics and do a lot of very good work, but they're only gonna reach out first to like the cisgender person, and it really, really is speaking volumes on how we think, what we think of trans people and what they say about themselves. Like, does it make sense to you?
Does it make sense to me? No.
Okay, so it speaks volume because to me...
Oh, wait, what you said make sense to me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, what you said makes sense to me. Yeah.
Okay. So it says a lot about truly the significance we're going to attribute trans people. It really says a lot about, like, you know, like you said before, like, oh, who are these crazy people? Like, they're always like shouting everywhere. Well, they're shouting because they're experiencing epistemic injustices. They're going through these injustices, and they want to be heard. And no matter how loud we shout, it's hard to be heard. And even today, those people, how many people have a transgender chair of study, and the people at the head is going to be a cis person? How many of those? I don't know the number, but I have never seen, and I know there might be one or two that I heard recently in the United States, but they are rarely held by trans people themselves. They are held by cisgender people. And these people make a career. They make a lot of money because this is a hot topic, right? And so there's the injustice too, right? They make money off of their own narratives. They make a research career on this. They're surfing the wave of like, oh, like trans people are cool. And suddenly a lot of people like have interest. A lot of cis people have interest in trans studies. What for? I have, as I used to be in a transaction group of the University of Montreal, and there was like one cisgender master's researcher. I think he was in sociology, and he approached us and was also like very rude. He was like, I want to study trans. He didn't even have like, that was so messy. We actually reported the school, like the university, because he didn't have like ethics approval. He wanted to publish what he had, like he wanted to make as knowledge to help us, like kind of like in a savior way. Like
he wanted to interview you, or
like he wanted to interview like members of the trans community and like what's their experience, I think in mental health or something like that, whatever. And it seemed like a lot of appropriation, like of like, you can see that in a lot of people who are having this savior kind of like mindset, like, oh my god, there's nothing, like right now we have to save these poor trans people. Oh my god, we have to save those trans children. Like, yes, obviously we have to do something, but it seemed like sometimes they even like a lot of trans parents are gonna call themselves like trans activists, like, and I'm like, oh, okay, like back down a little bit, like please back down, like that's, and people in research too. So, and I'm like, wow, that's, and making papers about it. Yeah, it is so self-centered. It is so it's just to shine light on themselves. Like, it seemed like there's a lot of like, look at me, what I'm doing is so moralistically good, like, kind of thing.
Yeah. I haven't personally interacted with cis people who devote a lot of their time to studying trans people, so I can only guess at like the psychology of those people. What is the mindset that motivates them to do that?
I think we want to all be seen as good people. I think that's, well, definitely the self-licensing sometimes that comes in, right? The, like, we talked last episode, like the, oh, I'm a good person, and I always wondered, like, what if I told that person, because I knew that person, what if I told that person exactly what I told the audience? Like, you're kind of like promoting yourself as an like a trans activist, kind of, almost like a trans activist slash parent activist, when the position you should hold is you should be at the back of us. You should be supporting, but you shouldn't call yourself an activist. Like, I wonder how that person would react. Would that be a cis fragile reaction? Would that be like what we call what we talked about last time, like the I'm an ally, like, don't you dare, like, don't you dare tell me I'm a bad person, whatever kind of thing. So yeah, and they're making money, a lot of money off of that. And as you know, I wanted access to this research career too. I have opportunities sometimes where I am given like good opportunities, but sometimes I'm like, someone is going on a show and someone is like, it seems like sometimes they're just taking the best opportunities and keeping them from themselves, and then like giving like, oh, there's like a lower kind of opportunity, we're gonna give it to like a trans people just to seem good. And that infuriates me. So yeah, a lot of unpaid work too.
What do you mean by that?
A lot of emotional catering to the people. Catering, sorry. Yeah, catering. To the people, a lot of education, and even if you work with them, like, I think you really have to be like mentally ready for what you're gonna see. It's hard. The academic world is hard, and sometimes you think these people, whenever like there's something bad happening to you, or people they won't come and use their clout to protect you. And that's when you see, like, are you really about protecting trans people? Are you really about like making our lives better? Or are you just like lip servicing or something? In overall, all we talked about, how do you think that would affect people's mental health, right?
Well, it's interesting to me that you said like trans people are screaming over epistemic injustice. Like, it is really a basic need to be able to define your own story, and when people take that away from you by putting an outside narrative on you that's unwanted, a narrative about like who and what trans people are, that's extremely demotivating as a human being. Like, to not be seen with dignity, to not be seen as like sane and rational and capable of making your own choices about your own body and your own identity, and, you know, understanding your own experience. And I think there's certainly a lot of like practical and material injustices too that are either caused or exacerbated by transness, by being trans, and transphobia. But it still is true that like what so much of what we want and what we're asking for is to just be for others to see us as we see ourselves. And the right to like tell our own stories and be believed about those stories. And to be able to have a voice and to speak for ourselves, and to not have other people speak for us or speak over us, not to have people speak about us without us being able to participate in the conversation and have a big role in steering the conversation. Yeah, I definitely think this idea of epistemic injustice can go a long way in talking about what trans people are really missing in this society and what we need still.
Yeah, there's definitely such a huge mountain of, let's say, a huge amount of shit that trans people have to go through still because of all of these injustices. And one of the very good examples I could give is how, like, a few years ago in Ontario, well, it was quite a long, not so much of a long time ago, well, considering the history of, like, trans health, but one of the, like, clinic of someone who, and it was documented, and so it's not news, of Kenneth J. Zucker in Ontario had a clinic, and he had conversion practices there, and he still publishes about trans people today. People read him still. They give him, and he is like the last one cited, referenced in co-authorship of the last W Path version 7 standards of care, Kenneth J. Zucker. And he used to be one of the first ones, I think, if not the first one, to be referenced in the version 6.
Oof.
And this person had his whole clinic closed by force because he was fucking people up. Like, literally, he was hurting children in that way, like hurting trans people, trans children.
Conversion therapy in this context means like an approach to trans care that is like, could you just not be trans?
Yeah.
Like, before we deal with the whole you being trans thing, let's just like, that seems too hard. So let's just try and make it easy and make you just be happy with your assigned gender and and just try to make you cis.
Yeah, that's what's called actually like desistance tactics. Like we try to like use a lot of, and also like desistance was also highly criticized as a way to do things because it comes from criminology. Right? Like it comes from criminology and the whole desistance like of like engaging in crime, right? People like, we would want to make people desist from doing that. And they took the same term and applied it to like trans children and trans people. So it's like, it's a whole mess. So just imagine, it's not so far away that people right now, even right now, are still being affected by conversion therapy, even though it was supposedly like, it's now supposedly illegal in Canada. There's definitely ways that are identified by academics that work in that topic that the current laws like do not make it like foolproof. So and trans people are, and this is citing from Savvy LGBTQ+, Savvy LGBTQ+, which is on inclusion and exclusion of knowledges of LGBTQ+ people. Non-binary people are, for example, 7 times more likely to go to conversion therapy than cisgender LGB people or LGBT people. And even on their sexual orientations, they're like close to 2 times. Closer to 2 times or 1.5 times more likely to have their sexual orientation converted, trying to be converted. So these injustices about our narratives have concrete and dire consequences to our mental health, our physical health, suicide rates, psychological distress, rates of depression, anxiety, which in turn has causes a lot of the physical problems we have. I mean, there's even relations, like links between like high stress, like, and the stress that you constantly have because you're in a minority, like you're like marginalized. For example, IBS is apparently more frequent in queer people, like irritable bowel syndrome, or so there are like physical consequences to the stress you experience. I mean, if you have generalized anxiety disorders, like generalized stress disorders, I don't remember which one it is, but you have more chances, you have more probabilities of getting a cancer.
Really?
Yeah, because it activates your the glands you have under your serenal glands, I think they're called. And those produce cortisol, which affects the tissues in your body when you produce too much, and it's like constantly producing more than it should be, and it actually affects your health. Like it's incredible how like mental health and health are related, and all of that, like it trickles down like from like these epistemical injustices to like our bodies and mental health, right?
Those two things, the thing about IBS and about cancer, is really remarkable.
There was like a huge presentation I saw on that's very recent, and how like literally just a constant stress you experience like will affect the kind of like the layer of cells that are aligned in your gut, and how like this is gonna like let more irritable, like usually it's just to let some of the nutrients go through your body, but if it's too wide, or if it's like uneven because it's disrupted by anxiety and cortisol and like other like chemicals in your body that are disbalanced, well, definitely it's gonna let the more irritable elements go, like kind of rub onto your gut and really create like these irritable bowels. This is a very simplistic explanation of it, but it really has like a kind of an effect on it. It's so yeah, epistemic injustices, and we're now we're at gut health, right?
Yeah, that's amazing though.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna finish this for today.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so that does it for this episode of Trans Theory on epistemic injustices. Thank you so much for listening.
And if you want to contact us and reach to tell us about a topic you would like us to talk about, you can do so by
going to transtheory.net and then just scroll down and hit the contact form.
Thank you so much, Yarrow.
Thank you, Ash.
Have a good day.
Bye.